So get this, I'm in the Taco Bell bathroom, and this is one of those moments where I'm just praying to God for mercy upon my soul, asking for forgiveness for all the things that I've done. And you know what God said to me? He said, gas is grace. I'm just kidding, none of that happened. I was actually driving home from the gym, and I ran out of gas. Well, my gas tank was on empty. And there comes a moment in these kinds of situations where you can fall into the illusion of the world and be afraid. You can worry, what if my car dies? What will I do? Or you can understand, or at the very least assume, that everything is ordained by God. You see, those who look at the world do not see God, and those who look at God do not see the world. And so the circumstances of my environment are not important. Of course, I am human, as you might be human as well. So it's understandable that we get pulled into fear, concern, worry. But when we turn our eyes toward God, you realize that there is no such thing as fear, worry, or concern. That all has been ordained, and you have always been provided for. Now, if you do not have a relationship with God, it may be difficult at first to trust. But what I find over and over again is that when I let go and trust, magically out of nowhere, I am provided for every single time. It reminds me of a story of my friend. Many, many years ago, when he was going through a really difficult time, he had no money, and he talked about scrounging through the couches for pennies and eating Taco Bell sauce packets. You see, being broke or being poor with ego is hell. But being poor or broke with no ego is grace. You see, because in these moments when we feel we lack or have nothing, we have no choice but to surrender, to rely on God. And you see, a lot of the times, God doesn't give us what we want, because then we would become prideful. We would think, oh, I don't need God. I can handle things myself. And you see this with people, in that they only pray to God when they need something, when they're in trouble. And that is a very dangerous place to be, because if you only rely on God when you're in trouble, then God will put you into situations where you will be in trouble. Because humans, at the end of the day, are much like children. We think we know it all, and yet we generally know nothing. God doesn't want you to rely on God because He is tyrannical, because He needs your love. It's because God loves you and knows that when you rely on God, everything works out perfectly. And when you rely on yourself, bad things happen. You see, God always gives you what you need to push through. He gives you that extra gas to finish the race, to achieve what needs to be done. You see, but people get caught in paying too much attention to this world, and they get sucked into it. And we have to understand that this system, this world system, is designed to enslave and steal your energy away from you. As if you were a human juice box, and they're just going to squeeze you until they get every last drop. It is designed to put extreme pressure on you so that you cannot live, so that you remain a slave to taxes, a slave to the dollar, a slave to society standards, a slave to the healthcare system, a slave to their food. And bit by bit, in all of these different areas of our life, they poison us, and they strip away the only thing that is valuable, and that is our life. And yet, at the end of the day, we trade it freely and give our consent. We trade the only things that are valuable, our energy, our life, our time, for money that has decreased in value since its conception. And a day will come where they rip the rug under all the people, and they say, sorry. And if you are not relying on God when that time comes, well then you will be very upset because you realized you will have been fooled. I think there's a story about this. You see, we struggle so much in this life because we place all the burdens of the world upon ourselves. And yet God can carry any burden, and it is as light as a feather. You see, the world will hypnotize you into being afraid, into worry and concern. But when you point your mind toward God, all of that just goes away. Because you're not playing their game anymore. The game of darkness and evil. You're not playing the game of illusion, but you have turned toward the truth. And you see, it is pride that prevents us from turning toward God. As Carl Jung once said, the modern man doesn't see God because he doesn't look low enough. When your chin is up in the air and you're high and mighty and you think you're on top of the world, you must realize that it can all be taken away in an instant. How many people do you think had plans for tomorrow and yet died last night? You see, when we are caught in the world, we are forced to rely on the safety that we provide ourselves, or we rely on other people. But the problem is that people are generally unreliable. Not because people are bad people. It's because human beings change their minds all the time. So we make promises that we can't keep, and we let people down. And yet God will never break a promise. You see, people have it twisted. You can have all your problems go away if only you would kneel. Sorry, that sounded a bit sadistic. You see, I think eventually we all come to a place where we realize that the way we do things just doesn't work. And it doesn't make sense not to rely on a higher power that can provide us everything that we desire and more without all of the nonsense. You see, some people just don't recognize the higher power, so they don't believe in it. And so they are forced to rely on themselves. But if you claim to be a believer of God, this comes with certain conditions. You see, how can you have fear and also believe in God at the same time? Either God has the power to do all things, or God doesn't. So what is there to be afraid of? God is either all-knowing or God's not. God already knows the outcomes to everything. God already knows all of the actions that you will take, all of the thoughts that you will think, all of your sins and your vices. So what purpose is the shame and the guilt? God already knows you're going to do it. It's not about asking for forgiveness. It's about doing better next time. And you might fail again and again and again and again, over and over and over again. And yet, what does shame and guilt add to your life but suffering? You see, people think that prayer is for God, but prayer is for you. It's so you can sleep good at night. And you don't have to worry about tomorrow. Because if at least you are provided for today, that is all that matters. But you see, if you rely on yourself, you can be dragged through poverty forever. You can be dragged through suffering forever. And yet all it takes is a simple pointing your mind in a better direction. You get what you focus on. So you will either get more problems and suffering because that's all you're focusing on, or you can get God. Get more God. Get God. God. Should be on a t-shirt. You see, God will not come into your life and infringe upon your free will. That is why we develop our relationship with God through humility. It's about how much we allow God in our life. And there is a balance. If we only let God 50% in, then we allow the darkness 50% in. Because you're either looking toward the eternal or you're looking toward the temporary. You're either looking at the world or you're looking at God. You see, God is always with you, no matter what. There's no such thing as being separate from God. It's just how aware are you of God's presence in your life? God is everywhere. But people do not have eyes to see because they are caught in the illusion of this world. They are lost in darkness, in unconsciousness. And unconsciousness is the source of all suffering. And so the cure is awareness. The cure is light. You see, people spend their lives trying to struggle and fight with the darkness, when all you have to do is turn on the lights, and the darkness evaporates instantly. You see, even if you make up your mind that you are carrying certain burdens for the people you love, or for the world, or for whatever, do you think you can be at your best with a bag of rocks on your shoulders? Or do you think you would be better free? Even if you don't have God in your life or don't believe in God, giving up the burdens would allow you to function better in this world. I mean, think about it practically. If your mind is preoccupied with negativity 50% of your life, then this will influence every other aspect of your life 50%, whatever that means. What it means, probably, is suffering and depression and misery. The entire quality of our lives are determined precisely by the quality of the things we focus our attention on. We can only focus on one thing at a time. You're either focusing on the darkness or you're focusing on the light. Positive, negative. It's not that complicated. The more negative things you focus on, the more fear, the shame, and the guilt, the more suffering you experience. Because these things are all the nature of darkness. There's a reason why religions have the idea of hell and of heaven. But modern people have lost this wisdom, lost the understanding, and have written it off as mere superstition. And yet there could be nothing more practical. You're either going down or you're going up. And the more you go up, the more you feel joy, peace, and love more often. The more you go down, the more suffering you experience. You see, the word sin comes from an archery term that means to miss the mark, and our mind is like a bow and arrow. It's a pointed object that you point in different directions. And so your ability to wield this tool that is your mind will determine the well-being that you experience in this life. Whether you focus it in the wrong directions or you focus it in the right directions, you focus it in ways that serve you or ways that destroy you. And the better you point your mind, the closer you get to God, and the closer you get to heaven. And the more you point your mind away from God, the closer you get to hell. Because heaven is synonymous with union, and hell is synonymous with separation. Union with and separation from God.